how the Congreve Rocket launched its way into immortality. There are many rockets that can lay the claim to being the most iconic in human history, but one that is often overlooked and holds a solid claim to the title is the Congreve Rocket. Invented in the 19th century by Sir William Congreve, the Congreve Rocket was used by the forces of the British Empire in battles all across the globe. The Congreve Rocket was inspired by rockets used against British forces while they fought in India. Famously, the Congreve rockets were used to fight against the French in the Napoleonic Wars, and they were used to fight against the Americans in the War of 1812. These rockets were not that accurate, and the range was not that far, but they did have a few advantages. They were light, easy to transport, and the rate of fire was higher than other conventional weapons of the time period. But one such advantage that gave them the edge on the battlefield was the psychological effect it had against the enemy. These rockets were loud and scary, and they struck fear in any soldier who had to face them on the battlefield. And the use of these rockets during the War of 1812 is what made them legendary. The War of 1812, as sometimes called in the US, America's Second War for Independence, or sometimes in Britain known as Mr. Madison's War, was a war fought between the United States and the British Empire in the early 19th century. The overall outcome of this war was mostly inconclusive. The two sides, after fighting, both mutually agreed to stop all hostilities, and they decided to go back to the way things were before the war. A status quo antebellum was reached at the peace treaty at Ghent, basically saying every enemy-held territory would just go back and the two would stop fighting. The British had more pressing issues that they wanted to focus on, such as fighting against Napoleon in Europe, and the Americans, well, they wanted to go back to doing what Americans do best, being American. Manifest destiny, baby. During the war, these rockets were used on the ground and at sea, and some vessels of the Royal Navy had rocket batteries, and these rocket ships, yes, there were rocket ships in the 1800s, just not the way that we think of rocket ships today. Well, they would bombard targets on land and at sea. The disastrous 1814 Battle of Bladensburg saw American servicemen fleeing in terror as a barrage of these rockets rained terror from above. This led to the British being able to capture America's capital of Washington, D.C., where they set fire to many public buildings and they burnt the presidential mansion, which we today know as the White House. But why does this make the Congreve Rocket legendary? After the British left Washington, D.C., their next target was the city of Baltimore. Land and naval forces made their way to this historic city where the Americans made their stand. Prior to the British attack, a young American lawyer set out to meet the British to negotiate the release of an American POW. Unfortunately for this lawyer, the British were about to commence their attack on the city of Baltimore, so they had to detain him, and they wouldn't let him go ashore until the battle had concluded. This young American lawyer was forced to watch the British attack the city of Baltimore. Standing in the way of the Royal Navy entering Baltimore Harbor was Fort McHenry. The Royal Navy bombarded the fort for 25 hours. 1,000 American servicemen manning the defenses of Fort McHenry returned fire all throughout the night. The British unleashed heavy ordnance, cannonballs, mortars, and of course, the Congreve Rocket to pound Fort McHenry and bombard it mercilessly. Witnessing the battle, the young American lawyer was on board the HMS Taunton, and he recalled as the rocket fire illuminated the night sky, giving him a glimpse of the fort and the raging Battle of Baltimore. But the next morning came, and the fort held strong throughout the night, with the American flag raised and waving above it. The British soldiers were defeated on land, and the Royal Navy withdrew. Baltimore was successfully defended and was spared the wrath that befell the nation's capital. And how does this make the Congreve Rocket legendary, you might ask? Well, the young lawyer who witnessed the battle while standing on a Royal Navy warship was so moved and so inspired by what he saw, he wrote a little poem. And that poem was titled the defense of Fort McHenry, and that lawyer was Francis Scott Key. And the defense of Fort McHenry, otherwise known as the Star Spangled Banner, went on to become America's national anthem. And so the lyrics of "And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there," which is heard by every American in school, every American before most major professional sport outings, people across the globe at the Olympics, or at diplomatic meetings, or numerous pop culture references, which means that you and most other people have heard of the Congreve Rocket. Maybe not overtly, but almost every person on the globe and every American has indirectly been exposed to a reference of the Congreve Rocket. And this is all due to the fact that Francis Scott Key included it in the defense of Fort McHenry and the Star Spangled Banner, which glorified America's defense of Baltimore, the brave American servicemen who manned their post at Fort McHenry, who risked everything to keep Baltimore safe from the British. Ergo, that is why the Congreve Rocket will live on with the legendary reputation that it has. Not only does it have a reputation and a legacy that was found on the battlefield, but it can also be found in the hearts of millions of Americans and people all across the globe. That is why, my friends, the Congreve Rocket can lay claim to being the most iconic rocket in human history, and that is how the Congreve Rocket launched its way into immortality. My friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you took something valuable from it, and I really hope you learned something from it. If you enjoyed the format, if you found this educational, please, all I ask is that you hit the like button, that you subscribe to my channel, and that you follow me on Instagram. It costs you nothing to do so. It's totally free, and it really, really, really helps me out. Guys, that's all I have for you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel, and God bless America.